Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of our video lectures. This is Professor Colin May from Stevenson University. We are in Criminal Justice 335. This week, I want to talk a little bit about the investigation process itself. This is obviously something that I've done for probably over 12 years at this point, and it's been really an interesting journey for me. So I've learned a lot about it in my tenure as a special agent and an investigator. And so one of the things that I want to use this to kind of talk through some of the issues and things that come up when actually conducting a white collar crime investigation, because they're similar to in many respects to a regular criminal investigation, burglary, robbery, or murder, anything like that. But it's also very different. So there are a lot of also divergencies that you want to think about. This is an adaptation of some presentation materials that I put together for the course that I teach on the graduate level, which is in the Forensic Studies program. And it is all about investigation, and we get into all the details throughout. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully it'll whet your appetite and consider taking the master's class. So investigation is about reconstructing what happened in the past. And it really is about understanding exactly what happened. And it's a search for evidence. And it's a search for things that make sense, that are relevant, and able to withstand the scrutiny of the court system from the rules of evidence. And really, you want it to be corroborated independently, and usually you want to do that through multiple sources. And a lot of times that means you interview and basically get the same kinds of things. And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. So, what is the investigator's mission? It really is about the unvarnished truth. No spin here. We want exactly what happened, why people did what they did, what they were thinking, what their state of mind was, and how they did it. And you follow all of the leads to their logical conclusion until you cannot go any further, essentially. It also requires some creativity. Sometimes people don't want to be found. Sometimes documents are hidden in places that you wouldn't expect. And sometimes information is going to be in the strangest of places. So always have that open mind. It's really, really important. And that being said, you also need to think about how this is all going to go down and what the court process is going to be. So you really do need to have an understanding of what it will be like to go to trial and use this evidence and have it subject to the scrutiny of things like the federal rules of evidence or civil procedure guidelines, things of that nature. Because that really goes to exactly the next bullet there, which is investigations are not undertaken lightly. There's obviously consequences regardless of the kind of investigation you're undertaking. And it really is about personal and professional integrity. And I think that in the media, you will have probably read regarding issues of individuals who have been promoted to certain levels. And you will find, without a doubt, for the most part, these are very highly trained and really have strong professional ethics. And it's really impossible to do it without that. It's not going to withstand the scrutiny of the court, and you're certainly not going to be able to get one over on the defense attorney or the opposition. So it really is about integrity and honesty. So let's talk about financial investigations. So most people are aware that there are other types of investigations. You have things like internal investigations at places of employment. You have background investigations for security clearances and positions and things like that. Then you also have crime scene investigations involving the collection of physical evidence, trace evidence, fingerprints, tool marks, things of that nature. Financial investigations are very, very different than most of those other types of investigations, although they certainly have more similarities with the background or the internal investigation, depending on what the issues are. It's really a method that uses financial records, and again, your goal is to identify illicit proceeds, illicit income, things of that sort, but also use it to track financial investigations, or excuse me, track financial transactions through the investigation and reconstruct any illegal income or that financial behaviors that indicate some type of crime occurred or this person was involved in some nefarious activity. And it's really, I mean, we talk all about white collar crime, but the applicability to financial investigation is so wide ranging. It's really amazing. If you look at later on in the book, we'll talk about the Iran-Contra affair, and you will find out, and you'll probably learn, that it was all about the money. It really was all about moving missiles and weapons systems from one country, gaining cash that was then funneled into another group. So really, all of these things, if there is a fraud motive or a financial gain to be had, financial investigation is the way to go. So here, this is probably one of my favorite slides that I've ever come up with, and it's not really my slide, but the idea is that all of these types of income, there's really only a few things that can happen with money. So money is either earned from a legitimate income, a job, or some other sales type of opportunity, things of that nature, a little bit more formal. You can certainly inherit funds. Money can be given as a gift to you, but it can also be stolen. And then it's either moved or stored. Okay, and by move, that means either it goes out of your pocket, or it goes into a financial institution under an account that you control, or it can be any other of these kind of secondary options. It can be sold, it can be loaned, it can be gifted, it can be invested, it can be used to purchase assets, but it can also be hoarded. And there are many, many cases out there, and they're absolutely fascinating, about people who claim to have some kind of cash hoard that enabled them to have this magnificent lifestyle, when in truth the hoard did not exist. That extra money came from some illicit activity. So this is a chart that I kind of made myself, but it really is it's really derived from the IRS when they do their trainings. And I really like it because it just shows you how limited the things are, that you can really do with money. So, it's really easy. That's why I do these kinds of crimes, because it is so easy to follow the money if you think in this kind of typology of where money goes in and where money goes out. So let's talk about the investigation itself. So obviously, first and foremost, you have to have a complaint. It's called predication, and that usually involves some source of complaint or allegation or information that indicates that something bad is happening. So one of the things that you really have to start doing is looking at what is available in terms of information, um, and kind of where do you go from here. So you want to look at whether the source has named themselves or they are anonymous. Obviously, anonymous sources are difficult to trace, but yet can often provide some very valuable information. So you don't want to discount it on the person's name or lack thereof alone. But you really want to look at the credibility of the information that they've provided. And part of that also goes to why they are providing it. I had a case once where it was a former spouse, and it was not information that was untrue, but the way she presented it was very damning, if you will. And so it required us to really do an intensive investigation. And, once the dust settled and we had gotten all the facts, she was no longer a credible source because we had been able to disprove a lot of the information that she had provided. And we believe that that was primarily because she was motivated by her wish to get revenge on her former spouse. So motivation is very, very powerful, and it's really important to understand why somebody is providing this information to you. You also need to see or look at how they know the information they're providing. It's one thing for somebody to call up, say, to the FBI and say, I have information about X, Y, and Z. And, when you look at X, Y, and Z, they were able to come up with this from the newspaper or reading, the internet or something. But when you say X, Y, Z, and ABC, and ABC, it turns out is, because of this person's confidential business relationship with the corrupt mayor or whoever they're making the allegations against, that might be something very, very different. And again, you want to look at corroboration, you want to look at documents and information that they are able to provide, but then you also want to look at the ability to gather leads and really understand exactly what happened to go down that next road. So after you analyze the initial complaint, you really need to do a legal review of the allegations. And a lot of times, this involves engaging either a prosecutor or general counsel or some other lawyer, especially in an internal investigation. This is really, really critical. What's the authority to investigate? Obviously, if you're in the FBI, and there are allegations of public corruption, then that certainly would be jurisdiction to investigate. But if it is a domestic dispute that somehow became, say, an extortion, but it only occurred within, the state lines of one county, or the boundary of one county in the state, that's more likely going to be a state police or other jurisdictions authority, and would not be available for prosecution by, say, the FBI or a federal agency. So you really want to look at that. You also want to look at actually whether the information provided indicates that a crime has occurred. We got so many calls that alleged something happened, but when you really dug down into what they were providing to you, there was no violation, there was no crime. They just wanted to somebody to talk to generally. So that actually is a huge issue. That's a great first step is this actually a crime? I understand you don't like it, but that doesn't necessarily make it an offense. So, and then again, you want to look at once the allegation has established some actual violation potentially, you want to look at what legal elements that are used to prove that violation. So if it's wire fraud, for instance, you want to go and look at the statute that explicitly talks about wire fraud and look at the elements of that. What are those parts of the statute that make wire fraud a crime? And then you use that to gather evidence to support the elements of that crime. And sometimes that doesn't work, and you actually end up refuting the allegation and disproving it, and that's actually just fine. And then you also want to think about potential defenses and claims because sometimes they will provide essentially red herrings that you need to look at, and an experienced investigator will generally try to run those to ground proactively because that makes for a better case. So the preliminary inquiry is the next phase, and this is usually fairly limited in both scope and duration. So what you do and how long you do it. It's been described by Richard Nosson, former Deputy Commissioner of the or Assistant Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, as the quiet phase. It's very discreet. You're not going out and doing search warrants or knocking on doors. You might do some limited interviews, but they primarily will be confidential sources. They may be some other law enforcement or regulatory agencies that may have had prior cases or contacts with the target. There may be some limited financial document reviews, but also looking at the public records, open source, things of that nature. So you're really kind of doing a desktop investigation is kind of the way I think about it. And again, it's very limited. You're not doing it for very long because what you're trying to do is identify if the information gathered so far supports the potential for a full-on criminal investigation, a full investigation. And you want to think about what the potential likelihood of success is for that. And you go back to kind of steps 1 and 2, where you analyze the complaint, analyze the authority and the jurisdiction and the possible violations. So those are really important to consider as well. Once the decision is made to do a full investigation, it all starts with an investigative plan. And again, we do an investigative plan in our FSINV 605, Physical and Documentary Evidence, that I teach. And really it's about how you're going to go about collecting evidence. You want to isolate all of the potential documents. You want to think about digital evidence. You also want to do some observation, things like surveillance or trash pulls, where they leave their garbage out on the side of the road for the trash truck to come, and then you can grab it. But then you also want to kind of look at what other documents are out there, what other financial information is out there, and really do some deep dive analysis on this, things like associates or other bank accounts, things like that. And then, of course, you're going to identify what your next steps are. Then you also obviously have to look at the documents themselves, the financial evidence, bank accounts, PayPal accounts, real estate records, business records, financial statements, things like that. Tax returns are such a great wealth of information if you can get them. There are so many different ways to get tax returns legally that do not involve having to go to court. but it's very hard sometimes. But you also need to know what you're looking at and how that all is working. There are, of course, other public records, court records, and then digital evidence. Absolutely critical, especially in this day and age. Then once you collect the evidence, you need to analyze it, and then a lot of this is things like comparing across prior years, doing a visual inspection, even things like a search warrant, taking photographs or video of the location. Very important. Think about it as a juror. If you're sitting there and you're talking about all this stuff and you're like, I have never been there, I don't know what it looks like, I don't know what they're talking about. But then they put up a whole array of photos that walk you through the entire store, the entire office, the house, whatever it is. Then you're there, and it's very, very powerful. So looking at it like that is really important. Financial patterns, behaviors, transactions, assets, tracing funds, anomalies and inconsistencies are so important in this phase. And everything is about context, because without context, they're meaningless. The numbers just are numbers. They don't tell the story. So you also need to do interviews. And the rule of thumb is you do interviews of neutral people first. And these are generally people who are not involved, or people like this bank teller, for instance, who really doesn't have any connection to the target or the individuals, but has some knowledge or something that they have that you are looking to identify. And that's where you really start. Then you move on to things like corroborating witnesses. I like somebody said people who know that they're actual witnesses, and don't mind telling you exactly what they saw, what they heard, what they felt, and impressions, things like that. They can also provide some great documentary evidence. And then finally, and absolutely last, you interview the conspirators, and you look at building who is the weakest person in the conspiracy chain. You want to build the strongest case against them first, and then that way, based on the strength of the case and their inability to keep up the charade any longer, hopefully you'll get either admissions, hopefully confessions of their activity, and then hopefully cooperation. Because the next one is really the target interview. And this is where you're trying to have a conversation with the main subject, the main target, and try to get something out of them other than no thanks, see you later, let me call my lawyer. And if they do, that's fine too, but it would be nice to at least get something. Then you also, this is an interesting quote from Napoleon, never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence. And basically what he's saying here is, just because something is wrong doesn't mean that it was intentionally wrong, or it benefited somebody. It may just be wrong because somebody was stupid, or somebody didn't do their job, or somebody missed a memo on something. So you really have to be really, really careful about identifying situations like that and placing blame where, quite frankly, there is no crime, there is no fraud, things like that. And very similar to arson investigations, where you're looking, you look at all when a building catches fire, When they do the origin and cause investigation, which is the fire investigation, the idea is to eliminate all of the potential areas that are accidental or unintentional, things like gas leaks, electrical problems, malfunctioning equipment, things of that nature that are not intentional. And once they've eliminated all of those, then they start really looking at the intentional nature of it. There are certainly some fires where it's very clear what happened, that it was an intentional fire based on the pattern and things like that. But they always start by eliminating after a thorough investigation, all these accidental or unintentional causes. And that is really important. So the way I look at it is you investigate to prove somebody's innocence. And that way you are always going to do a thorough job, and the evidence will speak for itself. And this quote from Sherlock Holmes, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. So then, obviously, once you've packaged the investigation, hopefully you're working with a prosecutor or your attorney throughout the process. But one of the things that you're going to be looking for, and they're going to be looking at, and whether to bring this to trial, is going to be the evaluation of the different prosecutorial factors. And these are just some very basic ones, but thinking of, is this a long-running pattern? Is there a scheme here? Is there multiple things going on? Are they using sophisticated techniques, things like offshore bank accounts or money mules, across the country? What is the amount of victim loss? This is a critical part in any financial crime, is to determine the loss, because that is generally how things are people are sentenced, is based on the amount of loss. Obviously, the higher the loss, or the greater the number of victims, the longer they will probably serve a prison sentence. Also, you want to look at what was gained by the perpetrator and what did they do with the money. You also want to explore the possible defenses or mitigating circumstances of culpability. Coercion or duress are factors. You also want to look at willfulness and intent. A lot of these you require a willful or intentional violation of the law. Not an accident is basically what that boils down to. So things of that nature. And clearly, who are the victims? Do they have civil remedies? Can they sue for the money? Or are they like elderly ladies who may have dementia and really can't fend for themselves? So we really have to look at a lot of those different factors, and it's a very complex process. But that's kind of the quick version. So we've talked a lot in the short time in this course about what is the impact of white collar crime, and this is really important because it goes back to the previous slide too. What is the impact of this prosecution? Does it protect or help protect the institutions of government? Does it help to protect the public fisc and public integrity? And insulate it from corruption and greed. Then you look at things like protecting free markets and ensuring that there's an adequate ability for people to buy and sell freely, but with trust. I mean, the free market is built on I pay you and you deliver me what I wanted and what I expected and what you told me you were going to deliver. And that's what fraud is not delivering or not being accurate in your descriptions. So so that's another important characteristic. Um, Obviously, public health, well-being, things of that nature, environmental crimes fall under that. A lot of healthcare fraud and other things, quackery, all fall into that public protection. You also want to look at reinforcing the rule of law and the role that the justice system plays. Sometimes people think they are above the law. Politicians who are involved in public corruption, bribery, and kickback often see themselves as untouchable. And using a prosecution to reinforce that rule of law is really important, and gain compliance. Voluntary compliance is critical. If not, we're in chaos. So that's a brief summary of our the process of white collar crime investigation. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was interesting, and give you some insight into thinking about how these cases that we're reading about and going forward reading materialize, and what it is that it takes to really dig into them. And again, this is a very high level overview, but it's a great introduction, I hope, and really hope that it kind of sparks your interest. So thank you again for being so responsive and doing a great job on the discussion board and the blogs. And if you have any questions, obviously keep posting them. Looking forward to our discussions. If you have any questions or thoughts or other topics that you'd like me to discuss, just let me know, and we'll try to get to them. Leave you this week with a quote from the great G.K. Chesterton, the British crime novelist. The criminal is the creative artist, the detective, the only critic. So I hope you enjoyed it. Again, feel free to post any questions you have. And other than that, have a great week. Thanks.